12. Charmaine McAllister. Over a 21-year period starting in the early 2000s, a British mother of three named Charmaine McAllister accumulated a rap sheet consisting of over 200 fraud-related crimes. During that time, she swindled dozens of innocent victims out of more than £100,000 through credit card scams while pretending to work in legitimate industries. To gain credibility and trust among her targets, McAllister posed as a cop, a bank employee, a military member, and an advertising executive. In reality, she was nothing more than a career thief who stole people's credit card information and piggybacked off their honestly earned incomes. She used the stolen lines of credit to pay for luxury cars, plastic surgery, expensive travel, and designer duds. Nobody was immune to becoming a target, including McAllister's own mother. McAllister also managed to fool at least 3 car dealerships into selling her vehicles, which she paid for with stolen credit. She quickly sold the cars for cash in a bid to make her crimes less traceable. But like many serial fraudsters, she's not as slick at covering her tracks as she seems to think. As of late 2023, McAllister had been to jail at least 16 times for her crimes, and she had just been sentenced to 15 months behind bars for her latest batch of convictions, which included 10 counts of fraud. At that time, she was already serving a 40-month term for previous offenses. The judge overseeing her most recent case described her as one of the most morally bankrupt women and the most dishonest he had ever come across. Based on McAllister's history, it's probably a good idea not to get high hopes that her life of dishonesty is over. Some people never stop committing their crimes of choice, and she appears to be one of them. And as the judge pointed out, she appears to have no moral compass or limits when it comes to the things she's willing to take from other people. 11. Nicole Cardona. You may have seen it before. Someone parking in a handicapped parking space even though they don't have a handicapped parking tag. It's rude, and unfortunately, it's common. But if the police catch someone doing it, that person gets a ticket, so at least there's a way to hold people accountable in most cases. A 26-year-old Florida woman named Nicole Cardona allegedly went to great lengths to wrongfully park in a handicapped spot without getting in trouble for it, and to help other people do the same. In 2022, the authorities arrested Cardona in Miami for allegedly selling fraudulently obtained disabled parking permits to non-disabled people. According to prosecutors, she acquired the tags through fake applications containing forged doctors' signatures. Law enforcement began investigating Cardona after a detective saw a restaurant worker using a handicapped parking tag under suspicious circumstances. The driver reportedly admitted that he bought the permit for $150 from a woman who was selling fraudulent applications, who he learned about from a coworker. Cardona was charged with 1 count each of organized scheme to defraud less than $20,000, criminal use of a public record or public records information, forgery, and false official statements. Following her arrest, Miami-Dade State Attorney Catherine Fernandez-Rundle said that the local authorities had been inundated with reports about people allegedly abusing disabled parking privileges, especially in residential neighborhoods. Fernandez-Rundle did not elaborate on the number of fraudulent passes that Cardona was accused of selling. An arrest warrant revealed that undercover detectives performed 2 controlled buys of phony disabled permits from the accused, who allegedly procured the passes after receiving copies of the buyer's driver's licenses. There have been no updates on the case since Cardona's arrest, leaving the outcome of the case unclear. 10. Jimmy Zong. Until a few days ago, University of Georgia graduate Jimmy Zong was known throughout the greater Atlanta area for being both a local party boy and a computer expert. Since then, he's gained worldwide notoriety for stealing a massive amount of cryptocurrency and getting away with it for nearly a decade. Back in 2012, Zong stole 50,000 Bitcoin from the infamous, now defunct, dark web marketplace known as the Silk Road. The crypto eventually skyrocketed in value to $3 billion, making Zong a very rich man. For years, federal agents scratched their heads as they tried to figure out who was behind the theft. Zong moved the money from one count to another while using technology to obscure its original source, making it nearly impossible to trace, and protecting him from being discovered by the authorities. It wasn't until 2019 when 28-year-old Zong called 911 to report that someone had stolen 150 bitcoins, worth nearly $600,000, from his home in Athens, that the pieces really started to fall in place for detectives. Even today, not everyone is familiar with how cryptocurrency works. Zong struggled to explain his predicament to the 911 dispatcher, and when the police failed to identify a suspect in the home break-in, he turned to a private investigator named Robin Martinelli. Martinelli was not a crypto expert, but she was determined to get to the bottom of Zong's case. And while Zong expected the home intruder to be identified and arrested, he would soon find himself in the hot seat for stealing the crypto in the first place. Luckily for Martinelli, Zong had a very sophisticated home surveillance system. It didn't take her long to determine that the home intruder was familiar with Zong's property and was therefore most likely someone he knew pretty well. She began conducting surveillance on Zong's friend group and quickly realized they appeared to be using him for his money, which he spent openly and in large amounts. Zong had a taste for the finer things in life. He liked designer labels, owned at least one vacation home, and decked his primary residence out with top-of-the-line furniture and entertainment. But on paper, he wasn't making the kind of money that was necessary to fund his lifestyle. In fact, he had no income on paper, period, and was living entirely on stolen money. After all, would you bother working if you had $3 billion at your fingertips? 6 months after Zong's 911 call to report the stolen Bitcoin, IRS agents traced a small amount of the ill-gotten crypto to a digital wallet that required him to use his real identity. The feds contacted local law enforcement and learned about Zong's bizarre police report, and for the first time, investigators were able to name a suspect. Knowing that they had to be sure that Zong was the culprit before making an arrest, authorities contacted him under the guise of investigating his complaint from months earlier. In reality, he was the focus of the investigation, and his 10-figure empire was about to come crashing down. When it comes to hacking, Zong is a genius, but based on his interactions with detectives and other people, he was socially inept, or at least careless. He bragged so openly about the fruits of his so-called investments that he basically incriminated himself to law enforcement. At the very least, Zong made it easy for federal agents to obtain a search warrant for his home and devices, at which point he learned that he was being investigated as a suspect rather than a victim. While executing the warrant in 2021, the feds recovered devices containing millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin, as well as a massive stash of cash and precious metals. They were able to trace some of the cryptocurrency to the original theft that occurred nearly 10 years earlier, and they also discovered how Zong succeeded in stealing it in the first place. He helped to develop Bitcoin technology, making him perfectly capable of hacking the software. Despite the enormity of Zong's theft, he only spent a year in federal prison after pleading guilty to wire fraud. He began serving his time in July 2023 and will soon be a free but far less rich man. The identity of the home intruder who stole some of his stolen Bitcoin remains a mystery to this day. 9. Michelle Mack and the California Girls. In December 2023, investigators raided the San Diego area home of 53-year-old Michelle Mack. They found an estimated $300,000 worth of stolen makeup and other beauty products that prosecutors claim were shoplifted from Ulta, Walgreens, TJ Maxx, Bath & Body Works, LensCrafters, Sephora, and other department stores across the United States. The seized merchandise marked the tip of the iceberg in what authorities are describing as a nationwide organized retail theft ring. According to prosecutors, Mack paid a dozen young women to steal the cosmetics, which she sold at bargain prices on her Amazon storefront, and even covered their travel and lodging expenses. She's also accused of identifying which stores to target and telling the women what products to take. Nicknamed the California Girls, the hired thieves allegedly committed hundreds of robberies in 11 states, including California, Texas, Florida, Massachusetts, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, Illinois, and Ohio. In some cases, they left entire shelves empty after swiping the items into designer handbags and fleeing the scene. The theft went on for years, amounting to an estimated $8 million in stolen goods. According to the most recent updates on the case, the investigation is ongoing, and the actual amount of stolen merchandise may be much higher. In early 2024, prosecutors announced the arrest of Mack, her husband Kenneth, and 7 other suspects on 140 charges, including 136 felony counts of grand theft. Not long after that, NBC San Diego revealed that the Mack's multi-million-dollar mansion has been put on the market. Not long after listing the home for sale, the couple dropped their asking price by $200,000, indicating that they may be desperate to sell it, as they face a world of legal problems that could land them in prison for years, if not decades. Neighbors who spoke with the station seemed happy that the Macks were arrested and are now facing justice in the court of law, a sentiment that is undoubtedly shared among the hundreds of retailers that the crime ring is accused of stealing from. 8. John Daryl Boyd. During the 1970s, John Daryl Boyd and his brother and business partner, Tracy, were 2 of Miami's most prominent and flamboyant drug smugglers. They became self-made multimillionaires by moving massive amounts of marijuana between Colombia and South Florida, and everyone knew who they were. John and Tracy made no efforts to hide their success, which would have been a smart idea since the authorities tend to ask questions when people get rich with no legitimate income on paper. People knew how the Boyds made their money, and many tried to distance themselves from any association with their line of business. The brothers were even snubbed by the Jerry Lewis Telethon, which politely turned down the $10,000 donation that they tried to make in a very public fashion by interrupting the fundraiser on live TV. In 1977, John and Tracy were indicted on a slew of federal smuggling charges that had the potential to land them behind bars for years, if not decades. Desperate to avoid prison, they both went on the run, with Tracy simply vanishing into thin air while John attempted to fake his own death. He parked his car at a remote location in the Everglades, used 2 different guns to stage a shootout, and covered the crime scene with enough of his own blood to make it look like there was no way he could have possibly survived. Hoping investigators would assume his body had been eaten by alligators, John fled to Buffalo, New York, where he had contacts who helped him start over under a fake identity. He settled down in the upper-middle-class suburb of Orchard Park and was eventually joined by his wife and children. For the next 2.5 years, they flew under the radar of investigators while posing as an average American family in front of their unsuspecting neighbors. Little did John realize the absence of a single body part at the crime scene was enough to convince investigators that he was alive and well. He and Tracy were both captured during the early 1980s. After his release, John Boyd returned to Florida, but he was reluctant to give up his criminal ways. In 2002, he and a crooked pharmacist were federally charged with 327 counts of fraud for scamming Medicaid. Boyd served another 4 years in prison before finally turning over a new leaf and making an honest living in the medical marijuana industry. Unfortunately, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. In 2013, more than 30 years after Boyd faked his own death, his 43-year-old son, Jason, was arrested for running a pill mill disguised as a pain clinic, which peddled highly addictive narcotics to addicts amid America's devastating opioid epidemic. Jason served a 7-year prison sentence and, unlike his father, appears to have avoided any further major trouble with the law. 7. Maryanne Smith. Behind every great TV show is a talented producer. Jonathan Walton achieved success as the brains behind hit series like American Ninja Warrior and Shark Tank. And he never imagined that he would fall victim to an international con artist who was lurking in plain sight, eager to get her hands on as much of his hard-earned money as possible. Walton met Maryanne Smith in 2013. He knew her as a royal Irish heiress who was worth millions of dollars, and at first, he had no reason not to believe her. Smith lavished Walton and his husband with expensive gifts and upscale dinners, leaving the couple with no reason to doubt her authenticity. At one point, Walton was so close with Smith that he considered her his best friend and assumed that there were no secrets between them. But Smith was no royal, nor was she a foreigner. Born and raised in Maryville, Tennessee, she was every bit as American as the victims she scammed. And when she was arrested on felony charges for allegedly scamming a previous employer, Smith told Walton that her estranged family back in Ireland was trying to withhold her inheritance from her. About a year later, she asked Walton for money to help fight for her inheritance in court. Walton gave Smith $75,000 toward her legal battle, but soon became suspicious that she was lying about her circumstances. He began digging for the truth and discovered that the woman who he thought was his friend had lied to him about almost everything imaginable, including her identity and her past. In his quest for the truth, Walton also learned that Smith had been convicted of grand theft for scamming her former employer out of $200,000. Smith has gone by several aliases, including Lucia Belia, Marianne Clark, Marianne Welch, Mare Ellis, and Marianne Andel. Her crimes date back to the mid-1990s and span multiple states, including Florida, Tennessee, Michigan, and California. And she's also been accused of fraud in Northern Ireland. In 2017, she was accused of stealing her own daughter's identity and using it to rent an apartment in Los Angeles. Smith has been living in Maine since 2020. In October 2023, the United Kingdom began the process of asking the US to extradite her so that she could be tried for charges stemming from alleged crimes that took place between 2008 and 2010. According to the Bangor Daily News, Smith offered a so-called high-interest investment opportunity to an Irish couple back in 2009. The victims forked over a check for $25,000 and never saw or heard from her again. Smith's lawyer recently argued that she isn't a flight risk, but the judge decided not to take any chances and ordered for her to be detained amid the ongoing extradition process. As of March 2024, she remains in custody while awaiting her next hearing. In the meantime, Walton regularly updates his blog, which is specifically dedicated to preventing more innocent people from falling victim to her scams. By raising awareness to her fraudulent lifestyle, Walton is ensuring that Smith fails in the court of public opinion, even if she manages to evade any major legal consequences for her actions. 6. Mark Weinberger. Dr. Mark Weinberger was an extremely skilled ear, nose, and throat specialist who didn't need to scam anyone in order to make good money. But greed got the better of him, and during the early 2000s, his Hippocratic oath fell to the wayside in favor of running his respected practice like a factory. Weinberger saw his patients with such haste that he failed to properly diagnose and treat them. Instead, he performed procedures they didn't need for the sake of billing their insurance. He also billed insurance companies for procedures that were never performed. Suspicions against Weinberger first arose in 2002, after a patient died from throat cancer that the money-grubbing doctor should have noticed. Instead of thoroughly investigating the patient's symptoms, he performed a completely unnecessary sinus operation, which he was happy to collect the insurance payment for. The deceased patient's surviving relatives filed a malpractice lawsuit, which served as a floodgate for the dozens of other victims who came forward with complaints of their own. In the meantime, the practice fell into millions of dollars of debt amid Weinberger's mounting legal costs. As the authorities turned up the heat on Weinberger, he did what most scammers do and went on the run. In 2004, he took his wife Michelle on a birthday trip to Greece, only to slip away during the night without explanation. Michelle was cleared of any involvement in her husband's disappearance, but remained blindly supportive of him even after being abandoned, and despite knowing he was a fugitive who was accused of serious crimes. Her loyalty would be put to the ultimate test when she learned that Weinberger's disappearance had left her saddled with his nearly $6 million debt. Weinberger's whereabouts remained a mystery for the next 5 years as federal authorities searched high and low for him. During his absence, a grand jury indicted him on 22 counts of healthcare fraud, and the government permanently revoked his medical license. The crooked surgeon's flight from justice came to an unceremonious end in 2009 when he was found in a tent on a snowy mountainside in the Italian Alps. It's unclear how long he'd been living at the campsite, which sat at an altitude of 6,000 feet, but it perhaps provided his victims with a small measure of comfort to learn that his time there was anything but glamorous. Having been reduced to surviving off melted snow and tinned food, Weinberger's new existence was a far cry from the lavish lifestyle he had once enjoyed at the cost of his patients' health and lives. In 2012, Weinberger was convicted as charged. The following year, a $55 million judgment was made in favor of 300 victims, many of whom will probably never see the money that's owed to them. Weinberger spent less than 5 years in federal prison, which only added insult to injury for the people he harmed, including some victims who suffer permanent damage due to his neglect. In 2021, NBC Chicago reported that Weinberger was living in Florida with a new wife and 2 young children while attempting to brand himself as a YouTube yoga guru. Former patients who spoke with the outlet did not mince words when they expressed their disgust about him living his best life after experiencing what seemed like a mere slap on the wrist for his life-ruining crimes. 5. John Stonehouse. John Stonehouse was once a highly praised member of British Parliament. His early successes as the country's Postmaster General even generated talk about him possibly running for Prime Minister one day. But his popularity streak came to an abrupt end during the 1970s, and he only had himself to blame for it. Stonehouse did a lot of bad things over a long period of time, while charading as a respectable politician. He allegedly spied on the UK for Czechoslovakia starting in the early 1960s. The accusation came to light in 1969, courtesy of an informant who had defected from the Czechoslovak Secret Service. At the time, Stonehouse successfully defended himself against the claim. But in more recent years, historians have compiled evidence indicating that the spy allegations were most likely true. In addition to betraying his country, Stonehouse was a serial fraudster. His scamming allegedly began during the 1970s after he started several companies in an attempt to supplement his political salary. The businesses failed, prompting the beleaguered MP to resort to a lifestyle of deception, even tricking those closest to him in unknowingly helping him carry out his financial crimes. In addition to his business failures, Stonehouse had no shortage of personal shortcomings. He cheated on his wife with his much younger secretary, Sheila Buckley, who stuck by him through the multitude of legal problems he would eventually face and become the mother to his youngest child. The public was shocked to learn of Stonehouse's death in 1974, but they would be even more shocked later on after learning that he was very much alive. After learning that he was being investigated for financial crimes, Stonehouse decided that he would fake his death instead of owning up to his wrongdoings. In November of that year, he left a pile of clothing on Miami Beach in an attempt to make it appear as though he had gone swimming and never returned. Just as Stonehouse had hoped, he was presumed dead despite no body being found. In reality, he and Sheila Buckley were en route to Australia, where he planned to spend the rest of his existence living under a fake identity. He cycled through multiple aliases as he moved suspiciously large amounts of money through various bank accounts. The transactions caught the attention of bank employees who informed law enforcement, and Stonehouse was soon put under surveillance. All it took to positively identify him was a call to Scotland Yard, who sent a photo of the supposedly dead politician to Australian investigators. After failing to obtain asylum in Sweden or Mauritius, Stonehouse was extradited to Britain, where he continued to serve as a member of parliament despite the criminal allegations he faced. In 1976, he was charged with 21 criminal counts, including fraud, theft, forgery, conspiracy to defraud, causing a false police investigation, and wasting police time. After a nearly 70-day trial, he was found guilty and sentenced to 7 years in prison, at which point he finally resigned from Parliament. Stonehouse was released from prison due to good behavior after serving less than 3 years. He remained active in the political scene and made a career out of selling the story of his disappearance. In addition to writing 3 novels, he made numerous TV appearances. Stonehouse relished in his infamy until the very end, when he collapsed and died on the set of a show about missing people in 1988. He was 62 years old. 4. Jonathan Lee Riches. Prison gives people a lot of time to think. Some use it productively, while others spend it trying to improve their criminal skills. And then there's Jonathan Lee Riches, who filed frivolous and nonsensical lawsuits against famous and well-known people as a hobby while serving a 10-year sentence for fraud at a federal prison in Kentucky. Since early 2006, Riches has filed more than 2,600 lawsuits in federal courts across the U.S. The vast pool of defendants included many celebrities, politicians, and organizations. In a lawsuit against Julian Assange, Riches accused the WikiLeaks founder of violating his privacy by taking photos of him being tortured at the infamous Abu Ghraib prison, where members of the U.S. military humiliated and abused detainees during the Iraq War. He also claimed that he paid for former Vice President Dick Cheney's heart surgery using a stolen credit card, and accused Hillary Clinton of stealing his credit card and using it to pay for her daughter's wedding. Riches even went as far as suing immigration authorities to prevent them from deporting him to Pakistan upon his release from prison in 2012, which was never the plan, considering the fact that he's a U.S. citizen who was born in Philadelphia. Of course, these allegations have never succeeded or been taken seriously. But Riches has also not suffered serious consequences for the multitude of lies contained within his excessive lawsuits. In 2018, he was charged with making false statements and other fraud-related crimes in Arizona for filing a bogus lawsuit against former politician Gabby Gilfords while posing as mass murderer Jared Lee Loughner. As of 2024, however, it appears as though he's living in the free world and using the internet as his tool for spreading conspiracy theories and false claims against people who don't know or care that he exists. Whether or not he'll land himself in serious trouble for this behavior remains to be seen. 3. Operation On the Fence. Organized retail theft has grown massively in recent years, and it's immensely profitable, which means that it probably won't end anytime soon. In the meantime, law enforcement is doing their best to shut down these sophisticated crime rings. One of the largest busts so far came in October 2023, at the conclusion of a 9-month investigation called Operation On the Fence. The large-scale undertaking ended with the arrest of 14 suspects, who are accused of stealing $20 million worth of goods from at least 20 different retailers over a several-year period. Instead of living the high life off their ill-gotten gains, they're now facing a slew of racketeering charges and putting whatever money they still have toward their legal costs. Based in Miami-Dade, Florida, the illicit organization consisted of at least 50 participants, who targeted department stores and supermarkets like CVS. According to prosecutors, the thieves printed their own barcodes and placed them over the manufacturer's barcodes. They also allegedly accessed a copy of each store's master key and were able to open locked glass cases containing valuable merchandise. The stolen goods included computers, TVs, guitars, over-the-counter medications, tools, pressure washers, and other items that carry high resale values. Simply put, the crew stole anything that wasn't nailed down, and they did so with such skill and efficiency that they've been described by Florida Attorney General Ashley Moody as the modern-day mafia. Like many retail theft rings, they resold the products on Amazon at prices that would be considered a steal, pun fully intended, while making themselves rich in the process. But crime comes at a price, and the accused are now waiting to see their day in court. Stealing from a rich corporation may feel like a victimless crime. It's even been glamorized in a Robin Hood-like sense, giving off the impression that it's okay, or perhaps even honorable, to steal from the rich to give to the poor, or to at least sell things to people at discount prices. But that's not the case, according to experts, who say that the nationwide spike in retail thefts in recent years has forced many stores to raise their prices. In that sense, innocent consumers are forced to shoulder the costs associated with these losses. And in some cases, companies have resorted to closing their hardest-hit locations, making the stores less accessible to the people who live nearby. In the end, nobody wins by being dishonest, including the dozen-plus defendants who are now potentially facing years behind bars for their crimes. 2. Raul Eduardo Prado. Raul Eduardo Prado was serving a 25-year prison sentence in Georgia for trafficking marijuana when he quietly slipped away from a worksite in 2018. The very next day, the U.S. Marshals arrested the 63-year-old in Miami, or so they thought. They were thrown for a loop when the apprehended suspect claimed to be Raul's twin brother, Gene Vernet Prado. Suspecting that the man was lying about his identity, the authorities held him in custody while they tried to figure out whether there was any truth to his claim. In the meantime, the suspect's lawyer accused the authorities of wrongfully detaining his client and filed a motion for the man's release. According to the attorney, Gene had been living under Raul's identity because he had come to the United States from Cuba and was undocumented. Prosecutors remained convinced that they had the right man in custody, but disproving the existence of a twin proved to be a months-long process. Investigators spent 3 months trying to find a record of Raul's supposed twin being born in Havana back in 1955. After failing to come up with any evidence of the twins' existence, a judge ruled that the man in custody was Raul. Despite his insistence otherwise, he was extradited back to Georgia, where he finished serving out his sentence at a maximum security prison. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Clayton Daniels. Most people who attempt to fake their own death understand that it takes a lot of effort to pull it off convincingly, and the vast majority get caught. Even after going to great lengths to make the world think they no longer exist. But there are always exceptions to the norm, including a 22-year-old unemployed car mechanic from Texas named Clayton Wayne Daniels, who tried to fake his own death while hiding in plain sight. Clayton had recently been convicted of abusing a female relative, and he and his wife, Molly, were broke with 2 children to feed. Desperate to support his family and avoid the slammer, or losing access to his kids, he figured he could kill 2 birds with 1 stone by faking his death. It would enable Molly to cash in on his six-figure life insurance policy while he shirked his debt to society and continued living in the free world under a new identity. In June 2004, a car belonging to Daniels and his wife, Molly, was found crashed and burned along a road in rural Burnett County. Little was left of the Chevy Cavalier, and the charred remains of the car's occupant had been reduced to a pile of bones and ash, weighing just 12 pounds. When investigators contacted the Daniels household, Molly told them that Clayton had gone to his mother's house the previous evening, but had never returned. Little did law enforcement realize, Molly was expecting to hear from them and had rehearsed her story ahead of time. The medical examiner ruled that the unrecognizable remains belonged to Clayton, even though they actually belonged to a recently deceased elderly woman named Charlotte Davis, whose body had been robbed from her grave by Clayton and Molly. While this major discrepancy initially went unnoticed, investigators struggled to determine what had caused the car fire to burn so intensely, especially in the absence of any sign that an accelerant was used to set the blaze. This would later be explained by the highly flammable embalming fluid that had been used on Charlotte's body. A sample of the body was sent off for DNA testing to confirm the identity, and the case remained under investigation. In the meantime, a funeral was held for Clayton, while Molly gave an Oscar-worthy performance as the grieving widow of a man who had tragically perished after falling asleep at the wheel. Of course, this was far from the truth. Clayton was alive and well, working on a farm for cash and in exchange for room and board. Unaware that he was housing a fugitive, the farm owner, a devout Christian, allowed him to live on the property as long as he promised to avoid booze, drugs, casual encounters with women, and other questionable activities. But it didn't last long. Being the natural-born bad boy that he was, Clayton found it impossible to stay on the straight and narrow and was soon kicked off the farm. With nowhere else to go, he returned to the apartment he and Molly shared and dyed his natural red hair black, hoping it was enough to convince the couple's kids that he was an entirely different person. Molly introduced him to the children as her new boyfriend, Jake Gregg. And while they hoped the kids fell for the ruse, they knew that no grown adult in their right mind would. Over the coming months, Clayton spent the vast majority of his time hiding out at home while Molly kept up the appearance of a recently widowed single mom. Oblivious to what was really going on, sympathetic community members went out of their way to help Molly get on her feet by helping her with things like childcare and household expenses. Deep down, the couple probably knew that the walls were closing in on them. The life insurance company was refusing to pay Molly until DNA results confirmed that the remains found in the car belonged to Clayton. Law enforcement was already suspicious, and the impending DNA results meant that it was also only a matter of time before investigators were breathing down Molly's back while demanding an explanation. A break in the case came when a witness told police about Jake and his uncanny resemblance to Clayton. Not long after that, authorities arrested the couple during a rare public outing. Clayton tried sticking to his false identity, but it didn't work. He eventually confessed to his crimes and is currently serving a 30-year sentence for insurance fraud and desecration of a cemetery. Molly also admitted to her role in the failed plot and was sentenced to 20 years behind bars. And while prosecutors blamed greed, she maintained that she and Clayton acted out of financial despair and a desperation to keep their family together.
9. Wayy Garon Mickleys. 38-year-old Wayy Garon Mickleys already had an extensive rap sheet when he stole a pickup truck earlier this year and sped through the streets of Oklahoma City, hitting speeds of up to 95 miles per hour and blasting through red lights. His lengthy list of past crimes include bank robberies, grand larceny, and robbery with a dangerous weapon. But Mickleys took his reckless behavior to a new low when he drove fast enough to lose control of the stolen truck and smashed into a car being driven by 28-year-old Star Shells. Sadly, the innocent young mother died in the crash. She was 5 months pregnant and left behind 2 sons. And several other people came close to dying that day when Mickley's narrowly avoided hitting their vehicles. He had sped off when officers tried to pull him over, triggering an intense police chase that unfortunately ended in tragedy. Starr's surviving family members hired a lawyer who told the Oklahoman that police made the situation even more dangerous by chasing Mickley's into a crowded area with a lot of people in it, especially during the busy early morning hours. Mickley's faces a slew of charges, including first-degree murder by eluding, felony attempting to elude, driving with a suspended license, reckless driving, and being under the influence of methamphetamine. 8. Kelsey Rose Hauser. Kelsey Rose Hauser was a passenger in a stolen car being driven by someone who gave police no choice but to open fire. When the 25-year-old found herself caught up in a high-speed chase in El Cajon, California in early 2016, it must have been terrifying, but she probably did not expect to die. Tragedy unfolded after police tried to pull over the red Toyota that Hauser was riding in with driver Jeffrey Sims, 2 other passengers, and a dog. After briefly stopping twice, Sims put the pedal to the metal and accelerated the car towards an officer who was getting out of his patrol car. The policeman quickly pulled out his gun and fired 4 or more bullets towards the vehicle, which smashed into 2 squad cars before coming to a stop. No officers were injured, but Hauser and the dog both died. Detectives told the press that they believed Sims and Hauser were fugitives with warrants out for their arrest. They charged Sims with attempted murder of a police officer and felony evading. The 2 surviving passengers were arrested on drug-related charges. A team from ABC News did its own digging and found that Hauser had a felony warrant out for her arrest for repeatedly failing to show to court in another county for drug possession charges. She and Sims were also wanted in Colorado on felony warrants. 7. Darren Ogham. In early 2019, police in Britain were pursuing a vehicle driven by 42-year-old Darren Ogham, a crack cocaine addict who didn't have a valid driver's license or car insurance. The chase only lasted 14 minutes, but the damage was far-reaching and permanent. While driving in his wife's car along the Aston Expressway with flashing lights in his rearview mirror, Ogham hit speeds of up to 100 miles per hour. At some point, he drove across the road and began driving in the wrong direction, directly into ongoing traffic. Ogham's vehicle finally came to an abrupt stop when he crashed into a Ford Fiesta being driven by Police Community Support Officer Holly Burke. He hit the car so hard, Burke died instantly upon impact. The suspect told police that he had panicked because he didn't want them to seize his wife's vehicle. He admitted that he smoked crack shortly before the chase. Ogham was sentenced to 9 years in prison and was banned from driving for 16 years. The prison sentence he received can only do so much to comfort Burke's friends and family, but at least he's behind bars, where he can't take any more innocent lives. 6. Death of an innocent bystander. One man was truly in the wrong place at the wrong time recently when he was struck suddenly by a Houston Police Department vehicle that the driver lost control of during a high-speed chase. It happened early in the evening when a woman contacted the police saying that a group of young men had held her at gunpoint and stolen her truck. The dealership she bought the truck through was able to track it, so she gave the location to law enforcement. When officers tried to pull the vehicle over, the driver sped off. The chase eventually ended with 5 youths jumping out of the truck and making a run for it. Police managed to capture 3 of them and charge them with aggravated assault. Right as things were starting to wind down, an HPD unit veered off the road and crashed into a sidewalk pedestrian, killing him in the process. Emergency personnel tried to save the man's life, but it was too late. The 2 police officers who were in the vehicle that crashed had been with the force for less than 2 years. They were placed on administrative leave while the situation is being investigated. This is just one example of tragedies resulting from police chases in recent years. A 2015 study found that high-speed police chases have killed at least 5,000 innocent bystanders and injured tens of thousands more since 1979. The actual number is likely even higher, according to researchers, because there's not really a solid established system for keeping track of these statistics. But people are aware that it's a problem and have increasingly called into question whether it's worth it for law enforcement to chase suspects for anything other than extremely serious crimes. And there's a growing movement to discourage police from relentlessly pursuing people for minor offenses. On the other hand, some members of law enforcement have pointed out that the majority of the time, when someone flees police over a minor offense, it's because they are guilty of something more serious and know that they might get caught. Plus, as Milwaukee Police Detective Michael Crivello pointed out in a 2015 USA Today interview, letting criminals think that they can get away with their behavior only encourages them to commit more crimes and take bigger risks, putting even more lives in danger. 5. A close call. Pritchard, Alabama resident Ashley Howard is lucky that she wasn't on her front porch the moment a suspect's vehicle crashed into it, causing major damage to her home. The impact was intense. Howard told local news station WPMI that she actually thought she was going to possibly die at first. Police from the Mobile and Pritchard departments were chasing a pickup truck when the driver lost control and rammed into her house, tearing down the structure rails. The driver was gone by the time Ashley got outside to see what happened. Now she's caught up in a miserable game of trying to see who will pay for the damages. Ashley doesn't have homeowners insurance, and both the Pritchard and Mobile police are denying any responsibility in the matter. In fact, they told her that the suspect will have to pay to fix the deck, if and when he gets caught, and who knows when that'll happen. Even if he is caught, it doesn't mean that he'll ever repay the money, and pursuing it could prove to be extremely time-consuming and stressful. Have you ever had a close call like this? Tell us about it in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. 4. Lewis Walker. While out on patrol in Evansville, Wyoming in the early hours of the morning, police noticed an SUV blow through a red light and jump a curb into a car wash parking lot. Officers followed the vehicle into a hotel parking lot where a passenger got out, but the driver ignored their commands and sped off with 2 other passengers inside. The chase lasted for hours. Thankfully, there was little traffic, so the pursuit didn't come at the cost of putting many other motorists or innocent bystanders' lives at risk. As the SUV approached the town of Glen Rock, officers prepared ahead of time by laying a spike strip in the road. The vehicle ran over it and popped at least 1 tire, but the driver was undeterred and got onto the interstate. Even after one of the front tires came off, the suspect continued driving at 90 miles per hour. As the vehicle rolled along on its front rim, spewing sparks onto the pavement, it pulled over, let one of the passengers out, and then went back to fleeing. The man who got out of the SUV told police that the 2 remaining suspects had weapons and wouldn't go down without a fight. Officers once again deployed spikes, and the driver continued to evade capture. But as they were about to learn, you can't run forever, especially with deflated tires. The vehicle hit some rocks over a drainage ditch and finally came to a stop. After chasing the SUV for 58 miles, police took the suspects into custody at gunpoint without incident. They found a loaded handgun that thankfully didn't get used. The driver, Lewis Walker, admitted that there were drugs in the vehicle and reportedly confessed to having used cocaine before the chase. He faces multiple charges, including eluding police officers, reckless endangerment, possession of a controlled substance. 3. Vanessa Armstead. At the beginning of 2021, 32-year-old Vanessa Armstead received medical treatment after getting into a car accident in Utica, New York. The next day, she allegedly walked into an ambulance storage facility and stole one of the vehicles. She led police on a 137-mile chase across the state. State troopers tried to stop the ambulance just 12 minutes after the unauthorized driver got behind the wheel, but Armstead refused to pull over. She got off the thruway in Rochester, smashed through the gate of a yacht club, and drove the vehicle straight into Irondequoit Bay. Vanessa swam to a private boat that was out on the water and was taken into custody. It took divers and a crew from the Monroe County Sheriff's Office over an hour to retrieve the ambulance. Police charged Armstead with felony charges of third-degree burglary and second-degree grand larceny. She was held on $3,500 bail. Vanessa admitted to stealing the ambulance but told investigators that she had no idea how she got to Monroe County. It's probably safe to say that this argument won't hold up well in court. 2. Joshua Schwartzwal. Police were baffled when a 23-year-old suspect named Joshua Schwartzwal managed to steal a Kansas Highway Patrol vehicle and drive it more than 30 miles while handcuffed behind his back, hitting speeds of 100 miles per hour along the way. Schwartzwal was being transferred to a detention facility following an arrest on suspicion of car theft when he saw the perfect opportunity to escape. The officer driving the vehicle pulled over to help with a serious motorcycle accident, and since Joshua was riding in the front passenger side with no partition or rear seat cage separating him from the driver's seat, while the officer was preoccupied helping the crash victims, Schwartzwal slid behind the wheel and took off. A high-speed chase ensued, but the car eventually started running out of gas. So Schwartzwal pulled over and continued the pursuit on foot. Police quickly caught up with him and apprehended him, but they didn't ask how he managed to drive with his hands already cuffed behind his back. Kansas Highway Patrol spokesperson Trooper Ted Hillerman told ABC News that he assumed Schwartzwal drove using his knees, which is admittedly impressive, especially considering how he traveled through narrow stretches of highway with a ditch on each side. 1. Brian Sorby and Adam Craner. About a month ago, someone called the police in Lapeer, Michigan, and reported a reckless driver in a Chevy Malibu who was speeding and ignoring traffic lights. The vehicle reached speeds of 120 miles per hour during the ensuing chase. Toward the end of the half-hour-long pursuit, the driver, 20-year-old Brian Sorby, tore through a cornfield and then went briefly back onto the road. Then he crashed the car into a drainage ditch. A panicked Sorby got out of the car and ran into a pond. Thankfully, deputies eventually managed to talk the young man into cooperating with them. Sorby's passenger, 18-year-old Adam Craner, had started to run away, but was more compliant than his friend and quickly caved to the officer's commands. Both men were taken to jail, where it was discovered that alcohol played a role in their behavior. Craner soon learned that it paid off to be cooperative with the police. He faces fewer charges than Sorby, who will soon answer in court for allegedly fleeing, assaulting, and resisting a police officer and operating while intoxicated. His $10,000 bond was also set much higher than his more compliant friend, whose bond was set at $1,000. All things considered, both men are tremendously lucky that they weren't seriously injured driving at such high speeds and barreling through intersections during red lights. And as Sorby learned, The longer you drag a chase out, the more serious your charges are likely to become.
Number 10. Shailene Woodley. In 2016, actress Shailene Woodley was arrested in North Dakota while participating in a protest against an oil pipeline project. Shailene recorded her arrest as it happened on livestream. If you're not sure who Shailene is, think Divergent, or The Fault in Our Stars, or even The Secret Life of an American Teenager. She hasn't got a lot of work in the last few years. It may have to do with the fact that she went to a construction site with about 200 other people to protest the pipeline, which was due to cross 4 states. She was just one of 27 people arrested on charges of criminal trespassing and participating in a riot. It wasn't really much of a riot, more like an angry group of people who weren't interested in having a pipeline rip up the sacred indigenous land and damage the environment. The actress was just 24 years old when the cops arrested her. As the arrest was happening, with 40,000 people watching her live stream, she said the cops had singled her out because of her fame. But in the end, she didn't really get in that much trouble. Things are going pretty well for her nowadays anyway. And last we heard, she's dating football star Aaron Rodgers. She also hasn't gotten in any big trouble since the pipeline incident. Number 9. Ryan Coogler. When Marvel's Black Panther came out, it was an enormous hit across the globe. This was partially because of how great a director Ryan Coogler is. He, the amazing actors, and everyone involved in the film made it a huge hit. But in January of 2022, Ryan was arrested for attempting to rob a bank. Wait, what? Yes, the director of one of the biggest movies of the past decade was apprehended by the police when he requested $12,000 in cash from the teller at a Bank of America in Atlanta. You can bet this never would have happened to Chadwick Boseman. May he rest in peace. The problem with being a director is that even though your name is on the movie, nobody really knows what you look like. The bank teller definitely didn't know who she was dealing with, and she called the cops to report a robbery in progress. It all started because Ryan handed her a note that said he wanted to withdraw the $12,000 from his checking account. The note asked if she could count the money somewhere else, as to be discreet. We don't know why he wanted the money, but that's none of our business. We also don't know why there was a black SUV with 2 people in it waiting for him outside. Again, it's none of our business. For some insane reason, the cashier thought she was being robbed, even though he asked her to take the money out of his checking account. She called the police. When the cops arrived, they put the director in handcuffs and arrested the people who were waiting for him in the SUV outside. Ryan was understandably upset. He was in Atlanta filming the sequel to the first Black Panther when the arrest happened. We don't know exactly what unfolded afterward, but know that Bank of America apologized profusely. Ryan also said that the bank worked with him to address the situation to his satisfaction, presumably meaning he was handed a nice stack of cash for his troubles. Number 8. Lil Kim. Lil Kim, the famous rapper, was sentenced to spend 1 year and 1 day in prison back in 2005. She was also given a fine of $50,000. And it was all because she lied to a federal grand jury to protect a group of friends who were involved in a shootout in 2001. 1 year and 1 day might seem like a long time, but it was a lot better than the 20 years she very well could have gotten. Her punishment was considered lenient. The rapper's real name is Kimberly Jones. The shooting she was involved with happened when her group crossed paths with a rival group of rappers called Capone and Noriega. One of the songs the other group had recently released contained an insult to Lil Kim, which was apparently enough to make them start shooting at each other. It happened just outside the radio station Hot 97, with one man getting injured, but nobody actually dying. When questioned about what happened, Lil Kim said she didn't know the men involved, but it was a lie that she revealed by video footage showing them together, as well as eyewitness reports. Lying to the judge about a daylight shooting put Kimberly behind bars. Number 7. Oscar Pistorius. Oscar Pistorius was labeled the most inspirational man in the world in 2012. He was the very first disabled man to run alongside able-bodied athletes at an Olympic event. He represented South Africa and actually came pretty close to winning. He didn't win, but it was still historic. He almost became an Olympian, even without proper use of his legs. The one cool thing he did get out of it all was his nickname Blade Runner. Alas, Oscar's celebrity status came crumbling down the year after. On Valentine's Day in 2013, he got into an argument with his girlfriend, Riva Steenkamp. She locked herself in the bathroom of their home in Pretoria. As she was hiding from him behind the door, he pulled out his gun and shot 4 times through the wood. When he finally got the door open to see what kind of damage he'd done, Reva was dead. When questioned by the police, Oscar tried to lie. He claimed an intruder broke into the house and shot his girlfriend. The police didn't believe it for a second, and the investigation proved he was a liar. He was initially sentenced to 6 years in prison, but had that increased to 15 years in 2017. What other cases can you think of when a celebrity role model went so horribly, horribly wrong? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe before the end of the video. Number 6. Devin Rattray. In the 1990 movie Home Alone, Devin Rattray played Kevin's older brother, Buzz McAllister. He hadn't been seen in much time since then, a few shows here and there. But in 2021, he found himself back in the spotlight in a big way for punching and strangling his girlfriend. At 44 years old, he was arrested and charged on 1 count of domestic assault and battery. It happened on December 9th, with police in Oklahoma City being called to the Hyatt Place at around 3 o'clock in the morning. When they got there, a woman told them Devin had beat the snot out of her. He threw her onto the bed, strangled her with 1 hand, while he used the other to cover her mouth. She bit his hand and strangled to get away, and that was when he started beating her. It was a pretty vicious assault, yet the woman refused to press charges against him. In the end, all the cops could do was make him leave and spend the night in another hotel. There were no arrests made at the time. It wasn't until the police were able to issue an arrest warrant that they could put him behind bars. He had his bond set at $25,000 and was released later that day. Number 5. Anthony Starr. The star of Amazon's hit show, The Boys, was arrested in Spain in 2022 for getting into a pub brawl. He's not the main star of the show, but definitely one of them. His name is even Anthony Starr, so you know he's the real deal. He's the guy who played the Homelander, the boys' version of Superman. Anthony was in Spain shooting a new movie for Guy Ritchie, along with Jake Gyllenhaal, when the event took place. According to the local police, Anthony, who was 46 years old, attacked a 21-year-old chef at a pub. This was no gentle attack of words either. Anthony punched the chef twice and then smashed a glass in his face. The man was left bleeding and in need of stitches, and Anthony was hauled off to jail. The star was given a 12-month suspended prison sentence. He was also fined just over $4,000. If you're not sure what a suspended sentence is, let us explain. In Spain, any conviction of under 2 years is automatically suspended if the culprit has no previous criminal record. This means the sentence is considered already served. Anthony isn't actually in jail and will get to go on filming his movie. Number 4. Tiffany Haddish. Police officers in Georgia responded to a 911 call at about 2:30 in the morning on a Friday in January 2022. They were called because a driver was discovered asleep at the wheel on the side of the road. By the time an officer with Peachtree City came across the vehicle, the woman inside had woken up. The cops pulled the driver over as she was parking in the yard of some random house. As it turned out, the driver was actor and comedian Tiffany Haddish, and she was wasted. She was arrested and charged with a DUI and transported to the Fayette County Jail. Tiffany had starred on a handful of TV shows, but her most famous role was probably in the movie Girls Trip. But for all her fame, Tiffany's life is currently in shambles. In an interview with Entertainment Tonight that came out just before her arrest, she admitted her life is a mess. She said she's been crying a lot. Her dog died. One of her closest friends died. She was separated from her partner after a relationship of over a year, and apparently, all of this accumulated in a drunken night on the road and passing out at the wheel of her car. Number 3. David Koechner. Even if you don't know his name, you definitely know David Koechner's face. He played in The Office, he was in the Anchorman films, and he's been in countless other comedies. You might know him as Todd Packer or as Champ Kind, but no matter which name you know him as, it turned out this guy is a criminal. He was arrested on New Year's Eve in 2022 for drunk driving in the middle of the afternoon in Simi Valley, California. According to what law enforcement told TMZ, they received a phone call from a concerned citizen about an erratic driver. David ran a stop sign in a residential neighborhood, crashed into a median, and then fled the scene. Cops tracked down his SUV and gave him a field sobriety test, at which point they saw he was 1.5 times the legal limit. It wasn't even dark out yet, and David was already wasted and cruising around. He was booked and released later that day, and is scheduled to appear in Ventura County Superior Court at the end of March. Number 2. The Celebrity Gardener. Daniel Malgoires was a famous celebrity in France. He was the most popular gardener in the entire country and the proud owner of the best garden in France. He wasn't exactly a movie star, but he was a pretty well-known guy. He became even more well-known in 2017 when he murdered a burglar during a bizarre extortion attempt on his wife. It happened on the evening of October 5th. The couple finished dinner and 2 men in hoods entered their property. Daniel went outside because the dog was barking, followed by his wife, Françoise. There was an altercation with one of the thieves, and Daniel fell into the grass, covered in blood. His wife was then subdued by the thugs and brought into the house. Shortly after, they brought Daniel into the house as well. That was when they started making threats, saying they were going to beat Françoise if she didn't give them the code to their safe. All the while, Daniel urged her to do what they said so that nobody got hurt. She became suspicious and refused to give up the cash she had hiding in her safe. And that was when Daniel shot one of the burglars at close range. This was a very bizarre case. Daniel had orchestrated the whole thing just to get the money from the safe for himself and to divide it with the burglars. He hired them with the help of a man named Richard Lopp. Richard was given 8 years in prison for helping to organize the burglary. The burglar who wasn't shot to death, Richard Bruno, was given 7 years. And finally, Daniel was sentenced to 18 years for murder at the age of 72. And it was all so that he can get whatever his wife was hiding in their safe, even though the couple was ridiculously wealthy and lived on a property bigger than most neighborhoods. And number 1, James Beeks. Broadway actor James Beeks was arrested in November of 2021, just before performing in Milwaukee. He was part of the Jesus Christ Superstar tour, but also happened to have some connections with the American extremist group called the Oath Keepers. Why was James arrested? He was apprehended in connection to the events that took place in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. He was part of the group that breached the U.S. Capitol building. His charges included obstruction of Congress and unlawfully entering a restricted building. James probably didn't think he was going to get in much trouble, considering a lot of time had already passed. Plus, he was doing very well for himself playing Judas in the musical Jesus Christ Superstar. But for his participation in what happened that day in D.C., his career has gone down the toilet. He was suspended from the tour and probably won't be getting much work in the future. When you're part of a riot, you don't exactly come up on the short list for Broadway productions.
Number 9. Ashley Judd. Ashley Judd has carved out a comfortable living as a high-profile actress, but in her spare time, she's a passionate activist who's eager to trade the glitz and glam of Hollywood for a much more modest existence as she works to make the world a better place. Last year, the starlet traveled to the Democratic Republic of Congo to do some conservation work in the remote bonobo peace forest, which is home to an endangered primate called the bonobo. Things took an unexpected turn for Ashley, though, when she tripped over a fallen tree and broke her leg. She laid on the forest floor for 5 hours while awaiting rescue, and that was just the beginning of what turned out to be a harrowing 55-hour journey to safety. Once help arrived, her Congolese friend reset her leg bone without anesthesia, causing her to go into shock and lose consciousness from the excruciating pain. A group of acquaintances then carried Judd back to their camp on a hammock. From there, she was transported to the city of Jolu on a motorcycle. Then she took a helicopter to the capital city of Kinshasa. Judd was then flown to a hospital in South Africa, where she received treatment in an intensive care unit. The altruistic actress posted a video on social media expressing her gratitude towards those who helped her access services that most locals themselves cannot afford. 6 months after the accident, the media reported that she was walking again. Number 8. A Frozen Nightmare. Located among the scenic slopes of a volcano in Russia's remote Kamchatka Peninsula, Vilyachinsky Waterfall attracts visitors year-round. It's fed by the pristine waters of a nearby melting glacier. During the winter, the 130-foot, 40 meters cascade of water freezes into a collection of massive icicles. It's an absolutely beautiful sight, but things can quickly get ugly if you get too close to it, as one group of tourists recently learned. During a visit to the site earlier this year, a group of 7 visitors and their guide became perilously trapped in ice after massive icicles broke off and fell from the frozen waterfall. At least one person was killed. Several were pulled back from the scene by quick-thinking bystanders, including a gravely wounded child. 4 people were left trapped as they awaited rescue. The government dispatched a helicopter to the scene, along with a team of more than 40 medics, investigators, and rescuers. At the time of reporting, 2 adults and a seriously injured child had been flown to the hospital. Emergency responders worked tirelessly to dig the remaining stranded tourists out from beneath the ice. An investigation into the cause of the catastrophic collapse is ongoing. Number 7. White Island Eruption. Located off New Zealand's North Island in the Bay of Plenty, White Island is an active volcano and a popular tourist attraction. Naturally, this kind of tourism comes with risks. But experts monitor seismic activity in the area so that they can warn the public of any dangers, which is exactly what they did in late 2019 when they raised the volcano's alert level. Unfortunately, tour companies failed to heed the caution and continued to take visitors to White Island. 2 weeks after the alert was issued, the volcano explosively erupted, spewing rock and ash into the air and killing 22 of the 47 people who were on the island at the time. 25 others were seriously injured, with most of them receiving intensive care for severe burns. American newlyweds Lauren Barham and Matthew Urey, who visited during their honeymoon cruise, described seeing nothing but pitch black as they took cover behind a rock in a desperate attempt to avoid the scalding ash and smoke. They suffered disfiguring burns and were placed in medically induced comas while they underwent skin grafts and reconstructive surgeries. The Ureys accused the cruise line and tour company of falsely advertising high safety standards and failing to prevent a needless catastrophe. And they're not the only ones who feel this way. In addition to facing numerous civil lawsuits, several companies and individuals are facing criminal charges for their alleged responsibility in the tragic disaster. Number 6. Bus crash in Bulgaria. A group of more than 50 tourists were riding through Bulgaria on their way back to North Macedonia after a trip to Turkey late last year, when their bus crashed into a barrier and erupted into flames. The accident happened along the Struma motorway near the village of Bosnak in the early morning hours. 7 people who jumped out of the vehicle were injured but survived. 45 others suffocated in the blaze, with their lifeless bodies turning to charcoal by the time the fire was extinguished. They were burned beyond recognition, making it extremely difficult to identify their remains. It was one of the deadliest bus accidents in the country's recent history and the deadliest European crash in the last decade. While the cause of the accident remains unclear, investigators believe that human error was responsible. Bulgarian Prime Minister Stefan Yanev was one of many politicians from different countries who expressed their dismay at the loss of life. He called on the public to learn lessons from the tragic incident to prevent such incidents in the future. Number 5. Gunfire in Paradise. Tourists were enjoying themselves on the pristine sands of Cancun late last year when a group of men pulled up on jet skis and began firing bullets into the air. The beachgoers ran for cover, and thankfully nobody was injured. Rick Labasa, who was visiting from Maine, told NBC5 that in 31 years of vacationing in Cancun, it was the first time he had ever seen an incident like this. He took a surprisingly nonchalant attitude toward the ordeal, explaining that because he had never experienced any issues before, he wasn't overly concerned about it. But not everyone was left unshaken by the random display of gunfire. A pair of tourists from Minnesota named Andy Gyrich and Kerry Arms described the moment they scrambled for safety while watching panicked, screaming and crying guests do the same. Police found and seized the jet skis, but the criminals remained at large. The disturbing incident came amid a noticeable uptick in violence along Mexico's resort-lined Caribbean coast, which had gotten bad enough for the military to be called in to help protect the area. Just weeks earlier, members of a drug gang had stormed the nearby beach at Puerto Morelos and opened fire outside luxury hotels, killing 2 rival gang members. Sadly, these life-threatening encounters are becoming more frequent as cartels fight for control over the area's highly profitable drug trade. But the violence is tarnishing the region's reputation for safety and tranquility, which is what draws so many visitors in the first place. In that sense, the warring drug dealers are risking driving away their own customer base. Number 4. Table Rock Lake Tragedy. The DUKW, or duck boat, is an amphibious vehicle that was used by the US and its allies during World War II and the Korean War. After the boats were taken out of service, they became popular in several cities as a fun way to show tourists around. But there have been numerous fatal accidents involving duck boats, leading many to question whether they should be allowed to operate. The latest tragedy to call the vehicle's safety into question came in 2018 when a duck boat entered Table Rock Lake in the Missouri Ozarks despite a severe thunderstorm warning in the area. By then, winds had already hit 60 miles per hour, 100 kilometers per hour, causing 3-foot, 1-meter waves. Within minutes, the vehicle began to sink as passengers desperately tried to escape. 17 people between the ages of 1 and 70 years old died. Tia Coleman, who lost 9 family members in the accident, told investigators that the crew had told passengers not to wear life jackets because they wouldn't need them. The boat's captain, Kenneth Scott McKee, was accused of failing to properly assess the weather before setting out on the lake. In 2020, a judge dismissed federal charges relating to McKee's alleged role in the tragedy. Determined to achieve justice for the victims, state authorities charged the captain and 2 other employees with 17 counts of involuntary manslaughter last July. The defendants asked a judge to dismiss the charges, arguing a lack of probable cause. They'll find out sometime this year if they'll face a criminal trial. Number 3. Stranded in a snowstorm. Located in northern Pakistan, the mountainside resort town of Murree attracts more tourists than it can handle, often leaving officials with no other choice than to limit how many vehicles are allowed to enter. Shortly into the new year, an estimated 100,000 or more visitors flocked to Murree to catch a glimpse of the winter snowfall, and for some reason, authorities failed to regulate the traffic. The town's streets became unbearably congested as a traffic jam formed on the outskirts. Thousands of cars became stranded, bumper to bumper, as a blizzard pounded the region with 5 feet, 1.5 meters of snow in just a few hours and knocked trees into the roads. Many tourists abandoned their vehicles and sought shelter at guest houses and any other warm buildings that would welcome them. Others languished in their cars without much needed food, warmth, and medical care. Emergency workers struggled to reach the scene as they found themselves caught in the traffic jams. The government summoned the military to Murree, but by the time help came, it was too late to save the 22 people who died in the disaster. Most of the individuals who perished froze to death, while some asphyxiated from inhaling toxic exhaust fumes. It took the military 2 days to rescue all the stranded survivors and fully clear the roads. Many survivors were left wondering why authorities allowed the mass stranding to happen. They reported receiving no emergency weather warnings and said that they thought it was perfectly safe to travel to Murree. Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan and the Punjab provincial government ordered an investigation into the ordeal to determine whether there was a failure to issue extreme weather warnings to the public or to regulate traffic coming into Murree. Number 2. Crushed in a canal. When a 50-year-old German law professor named Joachim Vogel and his wife took their 3 kids on a family trip to Venice in 2013, the last thing they expected was to go home with one less family member. But that's unfortunately what happened after a leisurely gondola ride through the city's canals turned deadly. The small boat collided with a water bus, or vaporetto, and Vogel was crushed to death. An investigation found traces of cocaine and marijuana in the gondolier's blood, but his handling of the boat did not appear to be a factor in the accident. Vogel's widow claimed that the larger vessel's operator didn't even notice when it hit the gondola her family was riding in. She questioned why there wasn't an extra pair of eyes at the stern, or why the boat wasn't equipped with more mirrors and cameras for safe maneuvering. It took a tragedy for officials to realize that traffic among the Venetian waterways desperately needed stricter oversight, especially as increased tourism clogged the canals more than ever before. Former city-appointed gondolier representative Aldo Rosso told The Guardian he was surprised that a deadly accident like this hadn't happened sooner. He went on to say that people do whatever they want on the canals. The city's mayor, Giorgio Orsoni, was quick to crack down on the congestion problem. Less than a month after Vogel was killed, Orsoni proposed 26 new measures to prevent more needless tragedies from happening, including drug and alcohol tests for boat handlers, an increased police presence, and a cutback on the number of gondolas that are allowed in the parts of the canal that tend to be the most crowded. Not everyone agreed on who was at fault for congestion in the canals. Gondoliers accused Vaporetto operators of traveling at unsafe speeds and failing to pay enough attention to the presence of smaller boats. Vaporetto operators claimed that gondoliers get in the way without any consideration for other vessels. Thankfully, there haven't been any similar fatal crashes since the collision that claimed Vogel's life. Number 1. Igal Tisman. A honeymoon is supposed to mark the beginning of a lifetime of wedded bliss, but for newlyweds Shia Frankel and Igal Tisman, the experience proved to be life-shattering. After tying the knot in 2018, the couple took a Caribbean cruise on the allure of the seas. Their fun came to a screeching halt during a ziplining excursion at a port stop in Honduras when Frankel got stuck on the line. Unable to stop on time, her husband crashed into her and died. The tragedy came amid a slew of allegations about unsafe conditions from others who had been injured on the ziplining excursion. They accused Royal Caribbean of failing to disclose that the activity was run by a separate company and falsely advertising top-notch safety standards. Past incidents revealed a troubling history marked by faulty brake systems, poor visibility, and poor communication among staff members between platforms. Several people crashed into platforms, in some cases resulting in gruesome injuries that exposed bone, muscle, and tendon. Other cases involved zipliners slamming into each other, often because there were too many people on the line at the same time. In one incident, 15 people got stuck on the line before employees even realized that something was wrong. Frankel sued Royal Caribbean for over $1 million in damages, but no amount of money could bring her husband back or heal the emotional wounds from his loss.
Thanks for watching. Assuming you'll never get your money back either way, would you rather lose $5,000 to a scammer who gets away with their crime, or $10,000 to a fraudster who gets caught and sentenced to the maximum? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.